The night should have felt like a celebration. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, everything shimmered with warmth when I walked in. I was late, but not enough to be forgotten. Or so I thought. The lights were soft, golden, and the smell of food hung in the air. I smiled as I stepped inside, holding the small gift I'd spent hours picking out. My cousin saw me first, then my mother. Her smile froze mid-conversation, her hand tightening around her glass. My father turned, his face unreadable, and before I could even say hello, his voice cut through the noise. "We didn't invite you for a reason." At first, I thought I'd misheard him. The room went quiet, laughter fading into a stillness that buzzed in my ears. Dozens of faces turned toward me, curious, uncomfortable, waiting for what would happen next. My throat tightened. My mother tried to give him a warning look, but he didn't care. He just stood there, his words hanging in the air like smoke. My cousin shifted awkwardly. Someone cleared their throat. The music stopped, then started again, quieter this time, like even the band wanted to disappear. I managed a small smile, one of those brittle ones people use when they're pretending not to break. "I just wanted to drop this off," I said, setting the gift on a nearby table. My hands shook, but I kept my voice calm. My father turned away before I'd even finished speaking. I could feel the heat rising behind my eyes, the mix of humiliation and disbelief twisting inside me. My mother looked down at her plate. No one stopped me when I walked toward the door. I remember the sound of my heels against the floor, sharp, deliberate, the only thing breaking the silence. Outside, the air was cool, but my face burned. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, staring back through the glass doors where the party had already resumed. Laughter filled the room again, the same way water rushes back into a space once something heavy is lifted away. They didn't miss me. They never would. That sentence, "We didn't invite you for a reason," kept replaying in my head. Each time, it cut a little deeper, but it also carved out something new. Space, distance, clarity. Because in that moment, standing under the dim lights of that parking lot, I realized I hadn't lost a family. I'd been freed from one. And what they didn't know was that rejection would become my beginning. For days, their words played on a loop in my head. "We didn't invite you for a reason." I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just kept replaying it, trying to understand what I'd done that was so unforgivable. I thought about every favor I'd done for them, the weekends I spent helping with errands, the money I'd lent and never asked back, the birthdays I never missed even when they forgot mine. It was like all of it had been erased overnight, like I'd been edited out of their lives without warning. When I tried calling my mother, she didn't answer. My messages went from long explanations to short check-ins, then to silence. My father, as expected, never replied. Even my sister, the one who used to confide in me, kept her distance. I saw her online, posting pictures from the party, bright, beautiful, full of laughter. There she was with our parents, arms wrapped around each other like nothing had ever gone wrong. And then I noticed something. In every shot, there was a space where I should have been, a chair I used to sit in, a place I once belonged. Scrolling through those photos, I felt something shift. It wasn't just anger, it was realization. They hadn't erased me that night. They'd been erasing me slowly for years. Every time they told me I was too sensitive, every time they made plans without me, every time my sister called me dramatic for noticing. That party was just the moment they finally said out loud what they'd been showing me all along. My mother's friends started whispering about family issues. I heard the tone in their voices when they said my name, soft, pitiful, as if I'd done something shameful. It was easier for them to believe I was the problem. It always is. Families like ours don't talk about truth. They talk around it. That night, I stayed up scrolling through every post, every smiling face, every perfect caption, and I understood something I never had before. I wasn't the problem. I was the reminder of the things they wanted to forget, of the truths they buried under dinners and photos. And reminders don't belong in perfect family pictures. They get cropped out, quietly, cleanly, like they were never there at all. When I was younger, I thought our family was normal. The smiles in photos, the polite dinners, the quiet routines. They all looked like love from the outside. But love, I've learned, can look a lot like obedience when you're too young to know the difference. My father's approval came with conditions. You didn't question him. You didn't argue. You nodded, smiled, and pretended to agree. My mother called it keeping the peace. I called it walking on glass. Even then, I noticed patterns. My sister learned early how to play along. She said what he wanted to hear, became the reflection he adored. I was different. I asked questions that made him pause. I pointed out contradictions he didn't like. And every time I spoke up, the room got colder. My mother would clear her throat or change the subject, and later she'd take me aside with that careful tone of hers. "You know how your father gets," she'd whisper. "Why do you always make things harder than they need to be?" That line stayed with me for years. I used to think it meant I was the problem, that love was supposed to be quiet, that if I just tried harder, maybe I'd earn their warmth again. So I tried. For birthdays, for holidays, for any small moment that felt like a bridge back to belonging. But every time I stepped forward, they stepped back. It wasn't about what I did wrong. It was about how much they needed control. When I grew older, the wall between us didn't just appear. It solidified. I started speaking up more, refusing to let silence cover up lies. My father stopped inviting me to family decisions. My mother avoided eye contact when things got tense. They wanted peace, but only on their terms. The kind where truth stayed buried and I stayed quiet. One night, I finally asked her why they treated me like a stranger. She didn't even look at me. She just sighed and said it again, softly this time, almost like a lullaby. "You always make things harder than they need to be." But I understood now. That line wasn't about keeping peace. It was about keeping control. Their love had rules, and I'd stopped following them. That night, for the first time, I didn't apologize. I just let the silence sit between us, heavy, honest, and unbroken, because I was done mistaking quiet for love. It had been a month since the party, a month of silence. Then one evening, my phone rang. My sister's name flashed on the screen, a name that used to mean comfort, now just a reminder. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to hear what they'd say when they finally remembered I existed. Her voice was soft, almost sugary, but there was tension underneath it. "Hey," she began. "We've been meaning to call." The way she said we made my chest tighten. She paused, then added, "The business is in a bit of trouble." I didn't say anything at first. She went on quickly, filling the silence. "It's just some mix-ups with taxes, missing files, a few late payments. Nothing serious. But Dad's been stressed. He thought maybe you could help. You're good with numbers, right?" Her tone tried to sound casual, but I could hear it. That tremor she got when she was lying. I asked if Dad was there. She hesitated. Then I heard his voice in the background, low and muffled, giving her instructions on what to say next. That's when I understood. This wasn't a peace offering. It was a transaction. They didn't miss me. They needed me. And I agreed, not because I wanted to be close again, but because I wanted to see how far they'd go to pretend. to see what desperation looked like in the people who once pretended they didn't need me at all. When I showed up at the office the next morning, everything looked normal on the surface: polished floors, tidy desks, fake smiles. But the air felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath. My father greeted me with that old half smile that used to make me feel like a child. "Good to see you," he said, as if the last few months hadn't happened. My mother avoided my eyes, pretending to be busy with paperwork. I sat down, opened the first file, and immediately noticed the gaps: missing invoices, conflicting balances, signatures that didn't match. This wasn't simple mismanagement. It was something else. Something deliberate. As I flipped through the pages, I could feel my father watching me, waiting for my reaction. I didn't give him one. Not yet. Because deep down, I already knew this wasn't about saving the business. It was about uncovering something they'd buried. And whatever it was about to surface. The next day, I went back to my father's office alone. The place always smelled the same: polished wood, old paper, a faint trace of his cologne. But that morning, it felt different. Too quiet, too clean. The desk was spotless, the drawers lined perfectly, like he'd spent more time erasing traces than running a business. He handed me a few folders before leaving for a meeting. I waited until I heard the door click shut. Then I started to dig. The files on top looked normal enough. Invoices, client statements, tax records, all perfectly neat. Almost too neat. My father had never been that organized. I flipped through pages, my fingers tracing the columns of numbers, everything balanced to the last cent. But there was a rhythm to it, one that felt rehearsed, a pattern that hid something beneath the surface. Then, at the bottom of one drawer, I noticed it. A false lining. It didn't match the wood grain. When I pressed gently on the edge, it shifted just slightly. My heart began to pound. I slid my fingers under the corner and lifted. Underneath was a small black ledger, worn around the edges, the kind of book meant to stay hidden. I opened it. Inside were numbers that didn't belong to any report I'd seen. Accounts listed under unfamiliar names. Transfers made to countries that didn't make sense. There were initials beside large sums. And some of those initials I recognized. Politicians, consultants, friends of my father who used to show up at our house in suits and smiles. I flipped further, and there it was. Offshore accounts tied directly to his company. Payments disguised as consulting fees. None of it accidental. It wasn't carelessness. It was control. Every transaction was deliberate. Each line a thread in something bigger than business. My father wasn't just avoiding taxes or bending rules. He was building something much darker. A network. A machine that fed on lies and loyalty. I sat there, staring at the ledger, the weight of it pressing on my chest. For years, I'd tried to earn his respect by following the rules he preached. But now I saw the truth. He'd built an empire on breaking them. And the worst part wasn't what he'd done. It was that he thought I'd never be smart enough to find out. After that day in my father's office, everything changed. My parents began treating me differently. Too kind, too careful. My mother started calling every morning, asking if I'd eaten, slipping my favorite meals into neatly packed containers for the road. My father, who had spent years criticizing my every choice, suddenly couldn't stop complimenting me. "You've always been sharp," he said one night. "It's good to have you back in the fold." Every word felt rehearsed, polished with just enough warmth to hide the panic underneath. I knew what they were doing. They weren't trying to rebuild a relationship. They were trying to measure one. Every smile, every question was bait. A test to see how much I'd seen, how much I knew. So I smiled back. I played the dutiful child again, the one they thought they could manage. I let my father brag about his vision, let my mother talk about how proud they were of my help. And every time they relaxed, I took another note, another file, another piece of their perfect image that was already rotting from the inside. At night, I worked quietly. I copied drives, photographed documents, and backed up files they thought they'd hidden too well. The deeper I went, the uglier it got. Bribes disguised as campaign donations, property transactions under fake names, my father's signature in places it should never have been, my mother's approval stamped on falsified expense reports. Every secret I uncovered chipped away at the lie they called a family business, a lie that had fed us, dressed us, and destroyed anyone who questioned it. And yet, even as the evidence piled up, part of me watched them with something close to pity. My father pacing the office, pretending to be calm while his eyes darted between me and the drawer where the ledger used to be. My mother trying too hard to act normal, humming as she cooked, hands trembling just enough to betray her. They didn't see me as a threat yet. They saw me as a problem they could still control. I knew I couldn't confront them. Not yet. People like them don't confess. They collapse. So I waited, quietly, patiently. Every compliment they gave me became another nail in their own coffin, because they thought I'd come back to help them. They didn't realize I'd come back to finish what they started. I wasn't their savior anymore. I was their storm, waiting for the right moment to break. They invited me to dinner, calling it a thank you meal. The tone of my sister's message was cheerful, rehearsed, the kind that tried too hard to sound casual. I knew what it was, a performance, another attempt to make everything look normal. Still, I went. I wanted to see how well they could pretend. The moment I walked through the door, I felt it. The same house, the same furniture, but colder somehow. My mother greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father patted my shoulder like we were business partners sealing a deal. The dining room glowed with warm light, but it all felt staged, like a photograph they'd stepped into. Dinner started the way it always did, with small talk that filled the air just enough to avoid silence. My mother poured wine like she was baptizing the table, her hands steady, her smile tight. My father talked about second chances and family unity, as if the words could erase years of betrayal. He told me how proud he was that we were working together again. Each phrase was chosen carefully, dipped in charm and denial. I played along. I smiled. I laughed in the right places, even complimented the food. Inside, I was studying every detail. The way my father avoided my eyes when the conversation turned to finances, the way my mother's fingers tapped nervously against her glass. They were terrified, though they'd never admit it. Halfway through the meal, my father leaned back and asked, almost too casually, "You didn't see anything unusual in the files, did you?" His voice was light, but his hand trembled as he reached for his drink. My mother's fork froze midair. I took my time, sipped my wine, and said softly, "Nothing worth remembering." The lie slid out easily, smooth and sweet, and I watched it land. His shoulders dropped, a wave of relief washing over his face. My mother exhaled like she'd been holding her breath the entire evening. They thought the storm had passed, that they were safe again. But sitting there, in that too bright room filled with false smiles and fading warmth, I knew the truth. The more they relaxed, the deeper they'd fall. Because peace built on lies doesn't last. It only waits. And I was done waiting. After that dinner, I started recording everything, not out of impulse, but precision. Their calls, their meetings, even their laughter when they thought no one was around. Every sound became a thread in the web they'd spun for themselves. My father liked to talk late at night, pacing his office with a drink in hand, bragging to anyone who'd listen about how he managed the system. He'd say things like, "They only catch people who don't know how to play the game." He never realized the game was already being recorded. My sister was just as careless. She'd joke over coffee about creative bookkeeping and how clients never check the fine print. She said it like a punchline, like fraud was a family tradition worth laughing about. I let her. I let them all talk freely, smiling, agreeing, pretending to be part of their circle again. Every compliment they gave me, every trusting glance, became another opportunity to collect what I needed. I didn't rush. I wanted them comfortable, relaxed. I wanted them to believe the danger had passed. The more secure they felt, the more reckless they became. My father even started giving me more access, asking for my advice, showing me files that confirmed everything I already knew. He mistook my silence for loyalty. My mother called it maturity. They didn't see that I was watching every move, noting every lie, storing every word that would one day bury them. At night, when the house was quiet, I'd listen to the recordings. Their voices filled the room. Smug, confident, untouchable. It was strange, hearing the people who raised me sound so small when stripped of charm and pretense. I began labeling the files like trophies. Dinner talk, client call, tax joke. Each one was another piece of truth, another nail in the coffin of the life they'd built on deceit. I learned something during those nights. Betrayal doesn't come from hate. It comes from trust. From the moment someone believes you've forgiven them. And they believed it completely. Every time I smiled, every time I said, "Don't worry, I'll handle it," they sank a little deeper into the illusion. They thought they'd rebuilt me into the obedient child they once controlled. But really, I was building something else, a cage, one they wouldn't see until the door finally closed around them. When they announced another family gathering, I knew exactly what it was. Not a reunion, a performance, a victory party to celebrate their so-called recovery. They wanted to prove that everything was fine, that their name still meant something. I got the invitation through my sister, her voice cheerful, her message rehearsed. "It would mean a lot if you came," she said, and I smiled to myself, because this time it would. I spent the next few days preparing, not with flowers or gifts, but with truth. My phone was ready, loaded with recordings, each one clear, undeniable, irrefutable. My father's voice laughing about laundering money, my sister joking about creative bookkeeping, my mother's soft tone saying, "We always fix things, one way or another." I didn't plan to make a scene. I planned to end one. When I arrived, the house was glowing again. Candles, music, champagne. Everything perfect on the surface. My mother greeted me like a long-lost friend. My father hugged me for the first time in years. And my sister pulled me into photos I knew she'd never post. They played their parts perfectly. But this time, I wasn't part of their act. I was the ending they didn't see coming. Dinner was loud and joyful. My father stood to give a speech, raising his glass to family resilience and loyalty that never breaks. My mother nodded, smiling proudly, and guests clapped. I watched, calm, waiting for the right silence, that small pause before the next lie. Then I stood up, reached into my pocket, and placed my phone on the table. I pressed play. The sound filled the room. My father's voice, unmistakable, laughing. "You just have to know how to move the money. The system rewards the smart ones." My sister's voice followed, joking about fooling clients. Then my mother's, cool, steady. "We always fix things, one way or another." The music stopped. Forks froze midair. The air turned heavy, thick with shock. I looked around, faces pale, mouths open, no one daring to move. My father's smile vanished completely. His eyes found mine, full of rage and fear, but he couldn't speak. I looked at him for a long moment and said quietly, "I didn't come for the food." The silence grew colder. "I came for the truth." And in that moment, the performance ended. Within a week, everything they'd built began to collapse. The news spread faster than I expected. Leaked recordings, financial reports, names tied to transactions that shouldn't exist. Investigators showed up at the office before sunrise. Their partners withdrew. Accounts froze. Employees started clearing their desks before the questions even reached them. What had once been a proud, polished business now looked like a crime scene made of paper and silence. My father locked himself inside the house. He stopped answering calls, stopped showing up to meetings, stopped pretending. My mother's voice cracked when she called me, whispering through tears, "You didn't have to do this." She wanted to know why, as if the years of deceit, the humiliation, the erasure hadn't already answered that question. I didn't pick up again after that. There was nothing left to say. My sister was louder. She flooded social media with long posts about betrayal and family loyalty, painting herself as the victim of my cruelty. "You don't destroy family," she wrote, but she was wrong. You destroy what destroys you. And family, as I'd learned, isn't made of blood. It's made of truth, something we never really had. The headlines called it a scandal. Words like embezzlement and fraud filled every page. But to me, it wasn't scandal. It was justice. Still, justice doesn't feel clean the way people imagine it does. It doesn't come with relief or triumph. It comes with quiet, heavy, suffocating quiet. The kind that seeps into you when the dust settles and you realize you've won, but at a cost. Some nights, I'd lie awake replaying everything, their faces when the recording played, the silence after the truth hit. I wondered if I'd gone too far, if there had been another way to make them see what they'd done. But then I'd remember that night at the first party, standing there while my father said, "We didn't invite you for a reason." I remembered the laughter that resumed after I left, the way they made me feel invisible. Now they finally understood what that felt like. To be locked out. To have the world move on without you. To watch everything you built fall apart and realize no one's coming to save you. The difference was, I didn't need saving anymore. Months passed before I went back to the house. I told myself it was closure, but maybe it was just curiosity, the need to see what was left of them. The driveway was cracked, weeds pushing through the gravel. The garden, once perfect and manicured, was wild now, reclaiming its space. Even the windows seemed tired, coated with dust and silence. When I stepped inside, the air felt old. The walls carried that faint smell of wood polish and something else. Decay, maybe, or time. The pictures were still there, smiling faces frozen in better years. I stopped at one of them, a photo of my father shaking hands with a man I now knew was part of his schemes. The frame was crooked, the glass cracked. It fit perfectly. I found him in the living room, sitting in his old chair by the window. He looked smaller than I remembered. His hair had gone almost completely gray, and his eyes had that distant, clouded look people get when the world has moved on without them. Papers surrounded him, newspapers mostly, their headlines screaming his downfall. He didn't look up when I entered. I stood there for a moment, just watching him. The man who had once filled every room with his voice now sat in silence, staring at nothing. Finally, I stepped forward and placed something on the table beside him, an old photograph. It was the four of us smiling, taken years ago before everything turned. I didn't say a word. He looked down at it slowly, his hands trembling as he picked it up. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, You didn't have to destroy us. I could have argued, could have shouted back every memory, every wound, every word that made me into the person standing there. But I didn't. I just said, quietly, "You did that yourself." He didn't respond. He just stared at the picture, the weight of it pressing against him. I turned to leave, the house creaking under my steps. There was no triumph in me, no fire, only a calm, settled truth. Some endings aren't revenge. They're balance. And this one, at last, felt even. A year passed before I heard from them again. It came in the mail, a thick white envelope with gold lettering and my name written in careful cursive. Inside was an invitation, my sister's new business launch. The logo looked familiar, the colors the same as the old company, just repainted, rebranded, reborn. The same last name at the top, as if the scandal had never happened, as if history could be rewritten with better lighting and a new font. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The paper smelled expensive, like fresh ink and perfume. It felt like them, polished, empty, desperate to look whole. I could almost hear their voices behind it, the same rehearsed charm, the same insistence that everything was fine now, that the past was just a misunderstanding, something we could all move on from. I smiled, a small, quiet smile that came from a place I didn't recognize at first. Peace. Then I tore the invitation neatly in half, the paper giving way with a sound that felt final. I dropped it into the trash, watching the gold edges disappear beneath the scraps of my ordinary life. That night, I cooked dinner for myself. Something simple, pasta, a little wine, one plate. I lit a single candle on the table. The flame flickered against the glass, soft and steady, the only light in the room. For the first time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt right. I sat there, eating slowly, thinking about how it all began. That night at the party, the words that sliced through me. "We didn't invite you for a reason." Back then, I thought those words were rejection. Now I see them differently. They weren't pushing me away. They were freeing me. I didn't lose a family that night. I lost the illusion of one. The idea that blood meant belonging, that silence meant love. What I gained instead was something they could never understand. Peace that didn't depend on approval. Strength that didn't need an invitation. When the candle burned low, I poured the last sip of wine and raised the glass to no one but myself. For the first time, it didn't feel like solitude. It felt like freedom. Sometimes, being excluded isn't cruelty, it's clarity. Because when they shut the door on you, they show you exactly where freedom begins.